The Canon R5 Mark II is already one of the most capable cameras you can buy, but right out of the box, it's not living up to its full potential. But with a few key changes, we can turn it into a camera that can basically handle anything you throw at it. Since launch in August 2024, I've been using two R5 Mark IIs almost daily in the field, and I've made a few tweaks since my initial setup video that made a noticeable difference. I'm Wegener, and for over 20 years I've been a professional photographer capturing unique bird photos and videos and teaching all of you to create your own masterpieces. This video is based on my earlier R5 Mark II setup video linked in the description, and today I will be going through the major changes that I've made since then. And if you want my full R5 Mark II setup, including a camera setup file that lets you install all my settings with just one click, my R5 Mark II setup guide is linked for you down below as well. The first thing I do on all my Canon cameras is to set the image type to C-RAW or compressed RAW. That still gives me excellent image quality, but also decreases file size, and in return dramatically increases my buffer size, which is very important for fast action shooting. In red tab number 3, I make sure to always enable the highlight tone priority whenever I'm dealing with high contrast scenes. It helps me to protect critical highlights from blowing out, and it also works directly with RAW files. However, highlight tone priority doesn't work with all softwares, and in some programs the file will just look too dark, whereas if you use Canon's DPP software or Photoshop and Lightroom, the changes are displayed properly and help you dramatically in the editing process to maintain detail in those critical bright areas. In red menu number 6, we have our pre-capture, or in Canon's case, pre-continuous shooting settings. In the past we couldn't really make any adjustments here, but now we can go into the menu and select how many frames we actually want to capture during the pre-capture sequence. And I like to set it to 6 or 8 frames. That gives me a little bit of extra to account for any delay in my reaction time, but I'm not being flooded with too many unnecessary files. With the latest firmware 1.3, we can later on in the green menu also now assign pre-capture directly to a button like the depth of field preview button in front of the camera, so we can instantly turn it on and off in the field whenever needed. And in red menu tab number 9, I always recommend to make sure that the auto power off temperature is set to high, so your camera doesn't prematurely turn off when you're using a lot of pre-capture or certain video modes. Now let's talk autofocus. On the R5 Mark II, I love using my triple back button autofocusing setup. And part of it gets assigned here in the pink menu, and the rest we will assign later on in the green custom buttons menu. My base autofocusing mode I set here in the pink menu is spot autofocus without tracking, indicated by the little lock icon. And later on we will assign this mode to the star button, so whenever we press the star button the camera will focus in our base autofocusing mode. One thing that freaks many people out is that if we select a non-tracking autofocus mode in the first pink menu, it basically grays out the rest of the menu. But that is totally fine, because all the tracking options we will set up later with custom buttons in the green menu. What I want to achieve here in the pink menu is to set my base autofocusing mode, and I want that to be pretty dumb, so I can just move the autofocusing point around and focus on whatever I want. That helps me to redirect the camera around if it gets stuck on the background, for instance, and also makes it easy to pre-focus. In pink tab number 3, I made one of my biggest changes compared to my original setup. Initially I used the manual autofocusing case with one setting to -2 and the other to -1. And while that worked well, I found that from time to time the R5 Mark II still had the tendency to jump on and off my target. After working with both of my R5 bodies extensively in the field, I realized that surprisingly the most reliable autofocus setting was actually auto, and that being set to +1. Now in theory that shouldn't really work and make the autofocus hyperactive, but I found it gives me the most consistent tracking results for perch birds and also for birds in flight. And in pink tab number 6 I make sure that the lens electronic manual focus is actually activated, so we can always manually intervene if our autofocusing needs adjustment. In the blue menu I don't make that many changes, but I always like to make sure that highlight alert is enabled and shows us those blinkies on the back of the camera if certain areas are beginning to be overexposed. Let's move on to the yellow menu, because here we can remove one of the biggest frustrations many photographers face with the R5 Mark II. By default, if you remove the first card from the camera, it will then instantly start writing onto the second card. However, if we reinsert card 1, the camera will not instantly switch back to it and keeps writing on the second card. And in the case of the R5 Mark II, that's usually the slower SD card, which we definitely don't want. To fix this, we go into yellow tab number 1, the record function and card folder selection, and then we navigate down to where it says record play, select that, and at the bottom we see the little box that you can tick when you press info. And if that box is ticked, it means that the R5 Mark II now will always default to card number 1. It's a small change, but it saves a lot of frustration. In the second yellow menu, we can set the camera sounds. And for some reason, Canon here first makes us enable the beep before we can access the volume menu. Personally, I like to keep everything silent, but I know that many of you love a little bit of a shutter sound with the electronic shutter, and here we can adjust it. In yellow menu tab number 5, we can adjust our custom shooting modes for stills. This is really powerful because it lets us build different setups, one for landscapes and one for birds, for instance. I also like to go a little bit deeper into this menu and enable the auto update settings. That means that now whenever I make a change within a custom mode, it's automatically saved to that custom mode. If you prefer your custom mode to always default back to the same settings, you leave that off. At the bottom we have save load settings, which lets you save your entire camera settings onto a card and also load them again. This is also the menu where you would install my camera setup file that comes with my guides, so you can get all my settings and custom modes with just one click. This brings us to the green menu where we can assign our custom buttons, and here I made a few big changes. My goal is to never have to think when using the camera in the field, and so I love to assign everything I need to custom buttons. That lets me react super fast and I basically never miss any critical moments. The first thing I do in the custom buttons menu is to disable shutter button focusing. We want to use triple back button autofocusing, so we want the shutter button to just take images and activate pre-capture, but not focus. Next, I navigate the menu down to the star button, go into the submenu and navigate to metering and autofocus start. Now that means that whenever we press and hold down the star button, it will trigger our base autofocus, which we have set to spot with no tracking. Next, I will assign whole area animal eye tracking to the AF on button, and there's actually two ways of doing it. One easy one and one that's a little bit more involved but gives us more control. The easiest way is to go into the submenu of the AF on button and then navigate to Eye Detection Autofocus and select it, and you're basically done. So whenever you press and hold the AF on button, the camera will now find and track the subject for you all over the viewfinder. While this approach is easy, I love a little bit more control though, and that's why I go into the submenu of the AF on button and then select Metering and Autofocus Start. But instead of pressing OK, I press Info, and that brings up the submenu where I can specify exactly what I want to happen when pressing and holding the AF on button. Anything I tick here will be active when pressing the AF on button, whereas anything that's unticked will default back to what I've set in the main menu. Because we assigned the eye tracking autofocus in this green menu here, it also doesn't matter that all the items in the pink menu were actually grayed out. Let's move on to one of the biggest changes since my initial setup video. Because on the third back button, the AF point selection button, I no longer use the eye controlled autofocus, but instead assign it to something else. Overall, I like the eye controlled autofocus, but I found it to be too hit and miss. Sometimes it works great and you can move the autofocus point easily with your eyes, but other times it just stopped working, so I decided I no longer want to use it. The second reason I moved away from the eye controlled autofocus is that I needed to free up one of the back buttons for something a lot more useful. My emergency high image quality button. My base settings on the R5 Mark II are always dialed in for action and razor sharp results, meaning I use a very high ISO and very high shutter speeds. But those settings are not ideal if I want maximum image quality for portraits or more controlled situations. So the high image quality button, while being pressed, instantly switches the camera into different settings with lower ISO, lower shutter speeds and a more stop down aperture, guaranteeing me maximum image quality. But the moment I let the button go, I'm immediately back at my action settings, allowing me to take high image quality portraits when needed, but also never missing any action moment. And I like to assign the high image quality button to the AF point selection button on the far right hand side of the R5 Mark II. And to do that, we select the button, navigate to the submenu, and in here go all the way down to where it says Register/Recall Shooting Function. And then we press Info. And that brings us a whole submenu where we can assign exactly what we want to happen when we press and hold down that button. So in my case, I dial in a low shutter speed of like 500 second, auto ISO, and also make sure that the aperture is a bit more stopped down, guaranteeing me great results. I go through the setup of all custom buttons in great detail in my camera setup guides, and they also come pre-installed with my camera setup file. In orange menu number 4, we can remove another common frustration. By default, the R5 Mark II will retract focus when it goes to sleep or you turn it off. This is mainly to protect certain lenses with extending front elements. However, if you're using it with a long telephoto lens, this is very annoying because whenever you turn the camera back on, it's completely defocused. But if we set retract lens on power off to off, The camera will stop that behavior and will always remember the last point you focused on before it turned off. As photographers, we need to remember that it's not only important to take great RAW files in the field, but we also need to learn a solid editing workflow that allows us to transform these RAW files into polished final images ready to be shared with the world. We spend countless hours in the field and thousands of dollars on our gear, so we shouldn't neglect the images we're taking and making sure they look the best they can. To help you on your editing journey, I developed my Lightroom and Photoshop masterclasses. In my classes, you will learn my easy-to-follow step-by-step workflow teaching you the tools and techniques that actually matter. So if you're ready to get stunning results from your own RAW files, my masterclasses are linked below. When it comes to video, I haven't made many changes at all, but I now use a different approach when I want to film in 4K 50 or 60 frames per second. One of the main limitations on the R5 Mark II is that we get oversampled super crisp 4K only up to 30 frames per second. Above that, in standard 4K 50 or 60 frames per second, the camera uses line skipping, resulting in noticeably softer footage. My workaround for this is to switch the main recording format to RAW, and then in the movie recording size, I select S-RAW and then 50 or 60 frames per second. And as the codec, I either select RAW for bigger files or RAW Lite if I want smaller files. These files are definitely heavier and you may need to use proxies or a very fast computer when editing, but the image quality is noticeably better compared to the standard 4K. While I don't use a lot of custom shooting modes for stills, I definitely assign all of them for video, because it allows me to easily switch between completely different video modes without having to deep dive into the menu first. So custom mode 1 these days are set to S-RAW and 50 or 60 frames per second, custom mode 2 is for slow motion at 100 or 120 frames per second, and custom mode 3 is assigned to 4K define oversampled 4K at 25 or 30 frames per second. Setting up custom shooting mode 3 for video is particularly important on all higher end Canon cameras, because they default to filming in that mode whenever you press the red record button on top of the camera, for instance, from photo mode. This makes switching between photo and video almost seamless in the field, so it's important to have good settings dialed in as custom mode 3. And that's my updated settings for the Canon R5 Mark II that I use daily in the field and have given me lots of fantastic images and videos. If you want to go deeper, I have my Lightroom and Photoshop masterclasses, as well as my Canon, Nikon and Sony setup guides linked for you down there in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, there's a lot more coming. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one, bye!